Started yesterday afternoon with conversations about agriculture and space. Talked about how Colorado State University is looking to bring a broader view through the National Western Center project. And then this morning, looking at our nation's ag safety, animal and plant safety, and the entire day. I don't know about you, but for this guy who spent 24 years in the business school, there were parts of this conversation that was mind-numbing, right? But yet, every bit exhilarating. I know there are people working on big problems and big issues so that we can address the big human challenges and the big agricultural challenges of our times. And I am so proud that Colorado State University is part of that conversation. So, and these conversations have been brought forth only because of the sponsors. By the way, these videos were fantastic. I'm talking about the videos that were developed both within Colorado State University and talking with, Gene has a second gig after his job as a moderator. But no, seriously, those videos were great. It captured the essence of CSU's research. The video from the Foundation for a Better Life that captures the essence of agriculture, right? And the conversations that we had here today. I hope it has inspired you as much as it's inspired me. And what you have done is also inspired, your work has inspired the students. And that's above all for me, right? And so it is all possible because of the generous financial support that we have received from our sponsors. I want to thank them again for doing that. You all coming, registering, and paying to be part of this helps the programming. And we do hope you have found this event to be useful such that next year, around the same time, next fall, you will be back, and maybe you'll bring a friend or two to come and join the conversation. This is all about convening people to be connected, to make a commitment to make agriculture a better place. But no one has done more for agriculture, in my opinion, and agriculture education in a long time than Secretary Tom Vilsack. Secretary Vilsack has served this event as the honorary chair. Secretary Vilsack has done more for agriculture in the state, at Colorado State University ever since he came and joined us last year. He has actually shaped our conversations around water, around the National Western Center projects, and even this program here today, identifying speakers and others that we could not have reached. Such an outstanding effort that he has done. For those of you who don't know the passion of Tom Vilsack, he was born in Pittsburgh, into an orphanage, was adopted in 1951, went to Hamilton College, went to Albany Law School, met Christy Vilsack back then, came back to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, where she's from, ran as mayor of Mount Pleasant, state senator from there, two-term governor of Iowa, and the longest-serving Secretary of Ag in the Obama administration. Here's an individual who has given of himself to agriculture. So it is only appropriate that he be the final say and the final voice for our 2018 Ag Innovation Summit. But before we do that, as we ask you to come this direction, I would like to present you with something in a token of our appreciation on behalf of our students.
Oh, great.
These are discussion boards from last year's conversations that Secretary Vilsack moderated and spoke to our students, and also at this. So
great.
It's with gratitude for all that you have done,
Well,
Secretary.
thank you. This is terrific. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Dean, thanks very much. Thank you. Well, first of all, let me congratulate all of you for being so attentive and so interested in the subject matter of this terrific summit. Frankly, Dean, as much as I appreciate those very kind gifts, I was hoping I would get something more. I was hoping after sitting through this entire day that I would at least get 1 hour of graduate credit at CSU, and I suspect that everyone else would like an hour or two of graduate credit. Am I right about that? Yeah. Well, I've been given the opportunity to close this conference, and I've got a couple of comments that I'd like to make relative to innovation and relative to what you've heard. And I want to first of all start off by thanking the university for inviting so many people who are currently working in the federal workforce and who have worked in the past in the federal workforce. And I think you saw from these folks who have dedicated decades of their life to safety and security, to making sure that you and your families were protected in a variety of different ways and from a variety of threats. I hope that you understand that they are very much typical of the people who work in government. In my experience, and I think I can speak for Christy and her experience at USAID, we were always impressed with the dedication and commitment that folks who work for the federal government have. And far too often, the general public doesn't see that side of the federal workforce. They hear a lot of people complain about the federal workforce, and I just hope that as you go back to your families, as you go back to your communities and go back to your jobs, that when the conversation takes place, as it no doubt will at a coffee shop or in some social setting about federal workers, that you'll remember these dedicated people that we heard from today, because they are truly representative of some really great people that are working every single day to make our lives better. So a round of applause for all of those folks who came here today. So I'd like to start with the concept of trust, and I really appreciate the Dean and his emphasis in this summit and in this conversation about the importance of values, because I think it is incredibly important for us to underscore values. I currently work, in addition to my work here at Colorado State, I currently represent the U.S. dairy industry in terms of exports. And I happen to be part of what is called the Innovation Center that is sponsored by checkoff dollars that the dairy industry in this country has committed to reestablishing and strengthening the bond of trust between dairy producers and consumers. And dairy producers are some of the most hardworking people in agriculture, and they're very proud of what they do and proud of what they sell. And they recognize the importance of reinforcing this trust relationship between producers and consumers. They understood it was going to be important to reach out on a daily basis to consumers. So they established last year a program called Undeniably Dairy. And the genesis and the gist of the program is to emphasize a number of aspects of dairy production and farmers in this country. First and foremost, how dedicated they are as a general proposition to their families and to their community, with examples that are displayed through a variety of mechanisms, media, social media, and earned media. They want to make sure that the sustainability message, which has been part of this summit, is emphasized. They go into great detail about the role that the dairy industry is now taking in reducing methane from dairy production through the use of anaerobic digesters, through the use of science to reduce the amount of methane produced. They are proud of a company called Nutrient that is currently working on converting manure from dairy operations into a wide variety of products. They tell the story of dairy producers across the country. And I think it's an important lesson for all of us, particularly in agriculture, to learn, which is the necessity of reestablishing that relationship and reminding people who these folks actually are, what they do every single day, how concerned they are about their animals and their welfare, how concerned they are about the safety and the nutritional value of the food that they're making for your family. That message will help us to establish that trust relationship, which I will tell you is becoming more and more important every single day. And it is particularly important when we are trying to sell to people outside of our country who may not know, who may not trust, as we do, our farmers, ranchers, and producers. I can tell you, having traveled around the world, both as the Secretary of Agriculture and now in my current capacity with the dairy industry, that often we have to reinforce the safety, the security, and the sustainability of products that we try to sell overseas. Because we are engaged in a very fierce competition with producers, processors from around the world. And our friends in Europe in particular do not hesitate to reinforce the message that is important to them about animal welfare, about sustainability, about security, and about safety. So it's an incredibly important conversation we've had today, and it's necessary for us to understand the necessity of constantly reminding people about this message of safe, secure, and sustainable, and to constantly work to improve the technologies that allow us to make the claim that we have the safest and most secure and most sustainably produced products in the world. In fact, the dairy industry can boast, truthfully, that they are the only dairy industry in the world that currently operates under an internationally certified animal welfare system. It's called FARM, F-A-R-M. It stands for Farmers Assuring Responsible Management, and it has been certified by ISO. It's the only such certification that I'm aware of in the dairy industry around the world. So it's a message that we can absolutely use and must use if we want to be successful in reestablishing trust and in being able to sell product around the world. Look, you've been confronted with a lot of information today. I think I made a partial list of some of the technologies and some of the innovations that have been discussed today. Gene editing and its incredible promise to respond to a safer and more secure and sustainably produced supply. Drones, sensors, GPS-equipped implements, irrigation systems, precision agriculture, enhanced stewardship opportunities, work that's been done in the animal science area for more efficient feeds and feed ratios. I mentioned to reduce methane, new fuel and energy sources coming out of agriculture. An incredible array of options now with reference to agricultural production, food that's produced from different processes. We discussed GMOs and non-GMOs and organic today. New protein sources. We didn't talk about beans to bugs, but I will tell you that there's a lot of innovation that's taking place in protein sources, and the demand for protein is just going to explode. You talk about 9 billion people, there's another component to that. And the component is that of that 9 billion people, with developing countries seeing economic growth, and some developing countries becoming developed countries, you're seeing an explosion of the middle classes in a number of these countries. And when middle classes explode and grow and expand, it means that they will be consuming more protein. I'll just give you one Asia-specific statistic to give you a sense of how drastic this could potentially be. Today, there are roughly 550, 560 million middle-class consumers in Asian countries. It is anticipated and expected, given current growth rates, that that number will increase by $2.7 billion in just the next 15 years. It's 2.7 billion people. So 2.7 billion people plus 550 billion, that's 320 million plus middle-class consumers. That's the entire population of the United States. So if you think about opportunity, don't think just about more mouths to feed, but you also need to understand that those mouths will be coming from people who can afford protein and who are going to be hungry for protein. So it's going to be important and necessary for us to have the kind of innovation that allows us to sell to the world an ever-increasing supply of safe, secure, and sustainably produced protein. Doing it at the same time, we're dealing with some of the challenges that have also been identified today in a changing and sometimes difficult climate. What wasn't discussed in great detail today is the extraordinary expansion of uses that we're currently seeing with agricultural production. We've obviously talked about food. We've talked a little bit about feed and fuel and energy, a little bit less about the fact that we're converting food products into chemicals and materials and trying to avoid food waste in doing so. Here's an interesting statistic from a recent trip I took to Korea. I had the opportunity to visit some folks in Korea, and while I was there, I was told that they've seen a rather significant reduction in the number of children in families in Korea. They used to have, on average, 4 to 5 children. Now they have somewhere 2 to 3 children. But they've decided to replace the number of children with an explosion in the number of pets that they have. And they are very particular about their pets. In the dairy industry, specifically, they want specifically designed milk for their dog. and specifically designed milk for their cat, and specifically designed feed products for all of the broad range of pets. And it is a very lucrative and an expensive opportunity for promotion of U.S. dairy products and for protein and for some of the whey protein that can go into the pet food. So there's just an enormous amount of potential innovation and opportunity. And we're also seeing expanded uses of soil. You know, you think of soil and you think, well, we're going to use it to grow things. Yes, we are. But we're also going to, I think over time, begin to see broader uses of soil as carbon storage, as part of ecosystem markets to improve habitat and to improve water quality. And all of this is occurring at an incredibly rapid pace. And as it's occurring, the technology that gives us the ability to produce new innovations is also accelerating. We're seeing an acceleration of the sharing of information and the remixing of huge amounts of data to give us a greater direction in terms of innovation. We're seeing the advances of AI in traditional farming chores, the Internet of Things that will allow us to essentially consolidate activities, operate a lot of what's going on the farm from a mechanical perspective through the Internet of Things. We're seeing the distribution of information. We're also seeing questions about who owns all of this information and whether or not individual farming information can be held private while at the same time can be accumulated for purposes of developing a big database. I thought of all of this when I was reading Tom Friedman's latest book. He, as you may know, is a reporter for the New York Times. And Tom has written a book, Thank You for Being Late. It's an unusual title, but it happens to be a story about Tom Friedman who was running late one day, and as he was leaving a garage, a parking garage, he was stopped by the attendant collecting his ticket and validating his ticket. Friedman was in a hurry, but this individual was very interested to talk to Tom Friedman. This is the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this fellow at the parking garage to talk to Tom Friedman, and he took the opportunity. And what he did is he got Friedman's attention by saying, you know, I'm your competitor. And that, Tom Friedman thought, was a little bit odd. I write for the New York Times. How can this guy be a competitor? Well, he was a blogger. And he was specifically blogging about activities in his home country. And he had a following of several hundred people. And finally, Friedman made the promise that if he would be allowed to go, because he was late, he would agree to have coffee with this fella. And so he made good on the promise. He had coffee. He learned a lot about this guy's blog. And he began to think about the world that we live in. And he concluded that what we are living in is a world of incredibly accelerated change in the pace of change. Not just that we're having change and dealing with change, but we are dealing with a much more accelerated pace of change. He talked about the incredible acceleration of computing technology, and Sally Roki basically, I think, made the point of that in her presentation. And it isn't just the pace of technology changes, it's also the pace of the way in which the climate is changing and the impact that that is having and will have and continues to have on our world. And finally, there is the pace of a globalized economy, whereas we discussed, if you have an incident here or anywhere, it could potentially impact and affect markets everywhere. And he, in his book, suggested, and I think this is a point that I'd like to emphasize, for the land-grant university, for the private sector, for the students who are here, that we need to work to ensure that the institutions and structures that will promote innovation are designed for this accelerated pace of change. Taking nothing away from Kevin Shea and his team at APHIS. They're terrific. But the reality is they are dealing with systems that take a long, long, long time to decide things. They have to be cautious, they have to be careful because the decisions they make are very important. But in this day and age, we can't afford systems that take that amount of time, and here's why. When the Cold War ended, And I think, Kevin, you made reference to the Cold War, so this ties in. My responsibility here was to tie everything together, so I'm really reaching with this one. When the Cold War ended, I think we in the United States got this impression that happy days were here again. We don't have anything to worry about. We don't have any competing philosophy that we have to show the rest of the world that we're better. We won. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Because in China, they are developing a competing narrative. And their competing narrative is that they are authoritative, but they are patient, and they are quick. They are able to make decisions very quickly in their system. They're able to make decisions about investments. They're able to make decisions about infrastructure investment and construction. They're able to make decisions about regulatory systems very, very quickly. Now, we can debate whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, but the reality is they are now going around the world and suggesting and making investments in other countries, establishing relationships based on this concept that we have a system that is better designed for the pace of change that we're confronting in the 21st century. So if we are to spawn innovation, if we are to encourage and embrace innovation, I think we also have to give our governmental entities that are involved in regulation and involved in developing incentives, we have to give them the space, the capacity, the encouragement, and the ability to accelerate their decision-making so that we can keep pace with this accelerated pace of change. And the same thing is true of patents. We grant patents for extended periods of time. I don't know if it was the 11th commandment on the tablets that Moses brought down. I don't think it was, but there doesn't necessarily have to be a patent that stands for 20 years. I think we need to think about whether or not the patents that we are giving are encouraging innovation or are they stifling it? And if they happen to be stifling it, is there a way of developing an appropriate balance between acknowledging the investments that people make to develop new innovation and providing them an opportunity for licensing agreements and profit, but doing so in a way that enables competition and choice. And I say that especially in the area of seeds because I often hear, as I talk to farmers, concern about the fact that the seeds that they are buying are more and more and more expensive and that they don't have choice. And they don't feel that they have control over that particular innovation. So I think it's something that we at land-grant universities, we in government, we in the private sector and nonprofit sector need to think about if we are going to really embrace innovation and allow it to flourish. The same thing is true, I think, when we talk about the ownership of this technology. Sally's comments were, I think, on point. When you look at the amount of public research versus privately funded research, you realize why farmers have concerns. Because we've flatlined publicly financed research, which would essentially be owned by all of us and available to all of us. But more and more, the technologies that are necessary are owned by someone else who, understandably, is entitled to profit. Well, what that does is it drives up the cost. It encourages more expensive technology, more expensive machinery. What does that do? The impact it has is I think it impacts on the size of operations in America that can support the technology, that can purchase the technology. So what you have in rural places is this potential conflict between those who embrace technology and innovation, and because of it, can afford to invest in more innovation and technology and get larger and larger and larger. And some of the producers that are not able to take full advantage of those technologies that are somewhat left behind. And as we think about policy, as we think about farm bills, as we think about incentives, is there some way of balancing the capacity of those large operations who are profitable and efficient and technologically advanced to continue to be so, but not necessarily sacrifice the opportunity for small and medium-sized operations to stay in business? And I think one of the ways to do that is to look at ways in which we can encourage local and regional supply chains that allow producers the opportunity to negotiate their own price and not necessarily be in competition with the larger concerns. So technology has a lot of good sides, but I think we have to think through all of this in terms of its impact. And yesterday I asked the question about what do we do about those folks who were impacted by transition, and I thought we just got a great response from Mark, who suggested that what we have to do is spend as much time thinking about that transition aspect as we do the innovative aspect. And I think that's one of the drawbacks of our innovation approach in America, is that we don't think about as much about those transitions. We don't think about the people who will be negatively impacted by all of this, and the result is there's growing frustration and a growing backlash. And I think, you know, it's incumbent upon land-grant universities and the smart people at land-grant universities working with the private sector, working with government officials to kind of figure this out so that we create an equally vibrant and rich transition system as we do an innovation system. And then there is this issue that was brought up in the last panel about whether or not there's a competitive advantage to safety, to sustainability. Well, I can tell you right now there is absolutely folks out there in the marketplace that are attempting to use information about their production process as a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And I have no problems generally with that, but I think we have to be very sensitive to the fact that that can be misused. Misused in the way that while you're elevating your product, you may be disparaging the entire product line. And I can give you an example or two from the dairy industry. We have some folks who sell dairy products, sell milk, and on the milk carton, on the milk bottle, they say non-GMO. And right next to it would be a milk carton or bottle that doesn't have that label on it. Well, the reality is there is no such thing as GMO milk. So when you say you're non-GMO, you might be kind of creating the impression or implying that if someone doesn't have that on their bottle, that somehow they have GMOs in their milk and they want the consumer to make the right choice. This is kind of deceptive. Or, my milk doesn't have any antibiotics in it. Well, no milk sold in grocery stores has antibiotics in it. So these negative claims, I think, you know, it's difficult, but we have to figure out some way of responsible marketing that allows people to do what the last panel suggested, that if there was indeed an advantage that improves something, it makes it more nutritious or safer, that you get the advantage of that, but that you do it in a way that doesn't disparage the entire product line. We recently had an issue with cheese. A company, I won't mention the company, decided to come into the U.S. market, and they wanted to distinguish their cheese from cheeses sold and produced in the U.S. So they got a group of young children, 7, 8-year-old children, and they asked them to describe RBST. So what do you think RBST is? Well, these kids had no idea what RBST is. So they used their imagination, and they came up with a character that was really tall, was really dark, had beady red eyes, fangs, kind of growled. So they took that character, overlaid the children's voices discussing what RBST could potentially do, and then transitioned to a mom in a kitchen making cheese sandwiches with cheese that didn't have RBST in them, and trying to suggest that if there was RBST in cheese, why that your child would be significantly at risk. That's not supported by the science. So I think it's important for us as we think about innovation that we think about ways in which those innovations can be marketed appropriately, marketed for advantage in a competitive world, but not in a way that necessarily undercuts the trust that people will have in all cheese or all dairy or all meat or all pork, whatever. The last thing I'd like to talk about is the nexus between innovation and four components. Innovation, three other components: innovation, research, education, and policy. I think during the course of this day, there has been a current running through our conversation about the fact that innovation does impact and is impacted and should impact policy, that there is a necessity for education, that there's clearly a necessity for research, and that all of this sort of comes together. And I think CSU understands that nexus between those four elements, which is why they are focused on the challenge that Colorado and the western U.S. is going to face with reference to water. In my state of Iowa, we are dealing not with water quality or quantity, we're dealing with water quality. It's a completely different set of issues out here. In addition to obviously wanting to protect the quality of water, there is now a real concern about whether or not there will be sufficient water to take care of growing cities, increased populations in places like Fort Collins and Denver, and allowing agriculture that is dependent on water to be able to continue to grow and prosper, as it is an incredibly important part of the culture and heritage and legacy of Colorado and the West. And in fact, the folks in Colorado were smart enough to come together and they studied this issue. They came up with a water plan, and under the water plan they identified that as cities continued to grow, as agriculture was continuing to be productive, more water would be needed, which is difficult because the Colorado River Basin that provides the water is shared. There's a shared responsibility between Colorado and 17 other states and Mexico about the allocation of that water. So this places a premium on figuring out ways in which agriculture, industry, municipalities, general consumers can conserve, preserve, reuse water, so that at the end of the day we can identify up to 325 billion gallons of water that, if we do a better job of conservation, preservation, storage, etc., we won't have to choose between agriculture and growing cities. Just imagine that kind of political choice in a state like Colorado. It's real. And so Colorado State has decided to dedicate itself to developing a water center as part of the National Western Center. It's the first of three facilities that will be built at the National Western Center, as you learned last night. And this water center is going to allow us to delve more deeply in all four of these areas, to identify the innovations that will allow us to be better preservers and conservers of water and reusers of water. It allows us to take a look at the policies that have to be looked at, not just in Colorado, but in the entire western U.S., and for that matter, the entire U.S. or the globe, that will have to be changed, to have to be modified, have to be enhanced, have to be incented, so that we can reach the goal. Certainly understand the importance of linking children, in particular in the K-12 system, to a better understanding of their water resources. Christy's involved in this effort, and she makes the point, which I think is a good one. You ask any kid in Colorado about the mountains, and they'll be able to tell you, maybe they'll even be able to tell you how many 14 years there are, and all of that. They have a relationship with these mountains. I mean, how can't you have a relationship with them? They're magnificent, but they don't have that same relationship with their water resources. And it's going to be necessary for us to figure out creative ways to educate and link kids to have a better understanding of water, so that over time they become better conservers and preservers and users of water. And they can encourage the rest of us to do so as well. So there's an education component, there's an innovation component, there's a research component, obviously because of land-grant university, and then there's obviously a policy component. And this water center is going to allow us to delve deeply into all four of those areas, so that as we look at the innovations necessary to accept this challenge, I think it gives us an opportunity to holistically look at innovation. Part of the challenge of innovation, and I think we heard it today, is that that those who innovate are focused on the innovation. And it's not necessarily their responsibility to focus on how do they educate the consumer necessarily, or how do they, the research, the policy, the regulation. They're just focused on doing something to improve the lives of people. But we need to figure out, particularly in the land-grant university system, we need to figure out how we can surround those innovators and the people who will be transitioned out of a life that they've been used to because of the innovation, how we can essentially help them. Because if we do that, and we do it in a way where our decision makers in government, our regulatory authorities, have the power and the capacity to do things quickly, I think we'll see an increased spurt in innovation within agriculture. I'm going to finish here in just a minute by showing you a video about the center. Some of you may have already seen this, but I think it's important to see it and to understand what this is about. But I end most of my comments about farming and agriculture with a reminder. And apologies to the USDA folks, because they've unfortunately had to listen to this for 8 years. So just one more time here for old time's sake. This conversation we're having is about really important people. Every single person in this audience who's not a farmer has the power and the capacity to make a choice about their life not to be a farmer, because they've delegated the responsibility of feeding themselves and their family to a relatively small percentage of America. When I was born, there were 25 million farmers in a population of about 150 million Americans. Today, 250,000 farm operations produce 85% of what we grow. Probably another million or so produce the other 10%, and another million produce about 5%. So it's a relatively small number of 320 million people. So they've given us, because they're so good at what they do, they're the best in the world. Let's just think about that. Just think about if you were the best football player in the world or the best entertainer in the world, you would be making tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. If you're the best surgeon in the world, you're not worried about whether you're going to be able to feed your family every day. If you're the best lawyer in the world, you're making a lot of money. If you're the best professor in the world, you're making a lot of money. If you're the best author in the world, the best carpenter, the best bricklayer. But the best farmer struggles in this country, despite the fact that because he or she does their job so well, the rest of us are free to pursue our dreams. Now, in addition to that, we walk out of grocery stores and we don't think about this because we're constantly thinking we're paying way too much for food, but the reality is we pay a lot less than just about anybody in the world as a percentage of our income for food. So we have the freedom to go to the ball game tomorrow, live in a nicer car, have your kid come to Colorado State University, have that choice. Take a little money, put a little aside for a vacation or retirement. We have this capacity, this incredible capacity within our economy, in large part because we have a functioning agricultural economy that is so efficient and so productive. It's allowed us to have this incredibly complex economy that we're so proud of. If you think of the hot spots in the world today, just think about this. Just think about where the hot spots in the world are. Where does this terror all emanate from? It emanates from places that can't feed their own people, where there's a lot of unemployment, where there isn't a sophisticated, complex economy, where there's, for all intents and purposes, not much of an economy because they never established the foundation for a complex economy, which is an agricultural economy. We have that in spades in the United States. On top of all of that, if that weren't enough, the fact that they've freed us up to do what we want, they give us extra cash in our pocket, they routinely send their sons and daughters into the military in greater numbers. Now, the reason they do that, and the reason why those sons and daughters and grandkids go into the military, isn't because there's nothing else to do. There's plenty to do on the farm. It's because they grow up understanding that from their parents, from their grandparents, that if there is something of value, in this case the land, that continues to give something to your family, there is a responsibility to give something back, to replenish and renourish that land. And most farmers understand that, preach that, live that. So their kids understand that, geez, if the land's giving us something so important, our livelihood, we got to give something back. Geez, if a country gives you freedom and liberty, I guess that means we have a responsibility to give something back to it. And I said yesterday to a group that if you ask me, what do you do for a living? A number of years ago, I would have said, well, I'm a lawyer. I would have said I'm in government service. I'm working for the dairy industry. That tells you what I do. It really doesn't tell you who I am. But you ask any of the people in this room that are farmers what they do, and they say, I'm a farmer. That doesn't just tell you what they do. That tells you who they are. So when we talk about innovation, when we talk about safety and security and sustainability and marketability of products and some of the challenges, so just remember and understand that as we focus on agriculture, what this is ultimately all about. It's about these great folks who need our help to stay in business, to allow us to continue to have a food secure nation, a complex economy, and kids willing to serve their country. That's what this is all about. So when Colorado State University says we got a water problem, we got a challenge, we got to figure it out because we don't want to have to choose between growing cities and agriculture, it's in large part because of the value system that's inherent in that agricultural system and the need to preserve it. So I want to thank you all for being here today. I don't know why they used to do this when I was Secretary of Agriculture. I think Jennifer Yezik was primarily responsible for this. She would always have me speak before the beer hour or before lunch, so I was always keeping people away from something I really wanted to do. So I'm going to give a few minutes of your time back. I'm going to close by asking you to spend just a minute or two looking at this video, and then I'm going to have one additional comment, and then you'll be free to go. So could roll the video, please. Everybody uses water, and everybody relies on water, and everyone has a story about water, and everyone will have a future dependent on water.
That water supply is dwindling. We're facing some major issues in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
In order for Colorado to continue to meet the needs of agriculture in growing cities, it's going to be necessary for us to identify nearly 1 million acre-feet of water that we don't have today that we'll need tomorrow. How do you do this in a way that is fair to cities, fair to agriculture?
The Water Resources Center will focus on water research, education, policy, and innovation, and it will act as a conduit to bring together great minds to work on these great global issues.
The Water Resources Center is really an exciting opportunity for Denver Water to partner with CSU on the emerging issues that we're going to be facing in the West.
And this partnership will be enhanced by collaboration with agricultural and recreational water users. Everyone who interacts with water has a place at the Water Resources Center, which will improve the way water is managed on all levels.
That's the place where you go if you have a question about policy. That's the place where you go where you want to question and devise new policies. That's the place where you can go to talk about an innovation that might allow you to preserve or conserve water resources. So I think the center has just an amazing capacity, not only a better and richer and more robust conversation about water, but a more efficient conversation about water.
A building is part of the equation to create an innovative atmosphere, but the interaction and collaboration fostered inside the building will be what makes this space unique.
We are approaching a time when we're going to need to be aware of what we call one water solutions, both within our system and west-wide. And what that means is really is efficiency. By having a water policy center and a water quality lab co-located at the same place, we can begin to take advantage of these innovations and see how they can apply within our system.
The work at the Water Resources Center will advance research solutions that address the needs of food producers, cities, and the environment.
And I think the time has come for us to really understand the role that water plays in our lives, to treat it as the precious natural resource that it is,
and to figure out ways in which we can ensure that future generations will have sufficient water to do all of the variety of activities that water currently does today.
The Water Center is, I think, an example of the type of collaboration and cooperation that I think many speakers at this summit today emphasized the need for. And I think it's because of the breadth and comprehensive nature of the partnerships, it's really kind of a new model, which I think will help to educate and inform us in terms of how we deal with some of the other larger problems that surface today. As part of that, we also will continue to do the job as a land-grant university of convening. We had a water symposium last March, which was attended by over 400 folks. Secretary Perdue was kind enough to come, and a number of other key leaders were there. We're going to continue that effort at convening. So we're looking forward next March to the second symposium, and we're going to focus, I believe, that second symposium on not just the problem, but also the opportunities that will arise as a result of being innovative and creative. You know, Christy and I were walking through the campus last night, and since Tony's not here, everyone associated with Colorado State University will attest that I've made mention of Abraham Lincoln, because if he were here, he would say something about Abraham Lincoln. What an incredible vision he had. And were he alive today, how proud he would be of the land-grant system and the job that it continues to do, and how important it is to the future of our country. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to think and act like President Lincoln, looking forward and utilizing the opportunity for education and research and innovation and policy to improve the lives of those we care about. So thank you all very much for attending, and thanks to CSU and their team for putting this on.